Hello everyone, I'm here to tell you some scary stories, but in a way that helps you relax and fall asleep. If you enjoy these videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps a lot. Also, tell me in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it right now. Now take a deep breath, listen to the gentle sound of the rain, and let your mind drift into the dark, peaceful world of tonight's story. The walk before dawn. It was one of those mornings that existed in the grey space between night and day, where the air feels heavy with silence, and even the streetlights seem uncertain of their duty. The kind of morning where the world feels paused, holding its breath before the day begins. It was around 5 in the morning. Mist hung low over the empty street, wrapping itself around lampposts and dull orange pools of light. My footsteps echoed in uneven rhythm against the cracked sidewalk, the soft rustle of my jacket, the only sound brave enough to fill the quiet. In one hand I carried my bag for coaching, in the other a half-eaten banana, my breakfast on the go. The city was barely awake. A few cars hummed far away, their lights slicing through fog like lazy fireflies. My thoughts were shallow, unimportant, whether to stop for coffee before the commute or after. That was the depth of my internal debate as I made my way toward the bus stop. It was a small ritual, this early walk. The familiar route, the comfort of the same shadows, the same quiet corners. The air was cool enough to make me pull my hat lower, my breath forming little ghosts in front of me. I liked these mornings. They belonged to me in a way no other time of day did. Then I reached the corner. The street bent there, wrapping around a narrow alley that sliced between two tired buildings, an old laundromat and a shuttered bakery with cracked glass. The alley was always dark, always damp, always something to ignore. I usually walked a little faster past it, but this morning something shifted. The fog seemed thicker near the mouth of the alley, swallowing the streetlight's glow. And before I could process why the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, someone stepped out, a tall figure, a man, dressed in black. A mask covering half his face. For a fraction of a second I didn't react. My mind lagged behind what my eyes were seeing. I was tired, half asleep, it was early. People didn't appear out of dark alleys in real life. Not in this neighborhood. I remember blinking, adjusting my bag, taking another bite of the banana, like an idiot refusing to believe that the world had just changed. Then he shouted, "Put down your fucking purse!" The sound ripped through the stillness, sharp and violent. I froze, time seemed to split open. My pulse exploded in my chest. The fog swallowed the edges of everything, and for a moment I was sure I hadn't heard him right. Then I saw it, the gun. It glinted faintly under the streetlight, pointed directly at my head. The air went cold. My mind began to split into two voices. One rational, one primal. Voice one, this is happening. Voice two, no it can't be. He moved closer, the gun unwavering. "Put down your bags!" I swallowed hard. My voice cracked as I said, Okay, I'm putting them down over here, okay?" Every word felt like walking barefoot over glass. I tried to sound compliant, steady, harmless. My heart was pounding so fast that it hurt. He gestured with the gun, motioning toward the alley. "Walk over here. Get down on the fucking ground." My body obeyed before my mind did. I moved slowly, my thoughts spiraling. Gun, alley, alone, fog, no one around. I knelt on the cold pavement, feeling the grit bite through my pants. My hands smelled faintly of banana. It was a stupid, ordinary smell in the middle of something terrifying. I tried to keep my breathing quiet, controlled. "Look," I said, forcing calm. "See, I'm on the ground." "My stuff is over there. Please, just take my stuff." He didn't like that. "Shut the fuck up," he screamed. The sound tore through the still air. Before I could react, he lunged forward, his shadow swallowing mine. He pressed the gun to the side of my head. The metal was cold, an unnatural, shocking cold that burned through the skin. My breath stopped. I could hear my pulse roaring in my ears, feel my heart hammering in my throat. In that suspended moment, I realized that death wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, simple, intimate. Just breath and silence and the weight of a stranger's decision. And then something changed. He hesitated. His breathing slowed. His eyes, barely visible through the mask, narrowed. I didn't understand at first. Then it hit me. He was seeing me. Not as a target, not as a random person. He was seeing who I was. I looked down at myself, baggy clothes, hat pulled low, jacket hanging loose. I was dressed like a teenage boy, fair coach ready for practice, but my voice had betrayed me. Something shifted in his stance. His grip loosened just slightly. His tone changed too, colder, sharper. "Come with me." He pointed toward the alley. The world seemed to narrow to that one gesture. The dark gap between buildings, the wet, uneven pavement, the place where I knew I would disappear. I remembered the news, the recent assaults, the warnings, and my stomach turned to ice. There was no way in hell I was going into that alley. By the time my grandmother grew old, the story of the night on the stairs had become a cornerstone of her life. A tale she told not just to recount a miraculous survival, but to instill understanding, vigilance, and respect for the unseen forces that shaped fate. She often spoke of the figure as a guardian, a silent protector who had intervened at a precise moment to preserve life. It had vanished after that night, leaving no trace, yet its influence endured in every careful decision she made thereafter. From her parenting to her navigation of post-war London, every choice carried the imprint of that unseen guidance. Her influence extended beyond caution. It was a philosophy, a way of approaching the world with both awareness and humility. She taught my father to notice subtleties, to trust instincts, to respect that life often whispers warnings before it shouts. And he in turn carried those lessons forward, a legacy of vigilance born from a single night of crisis. The city itself had changed. War-scarred buildings were rebuilt, streets cleared, life restored. But in the quiet corners of her memory, the events of that night remained vivid. The explosion, the collapsed roof, the echo of the figure's warning. It was a reminder that life was fragile, that danger often hid in plain sight, and that protection could come from unexpected, invisible sources. Even in her final years, she would recount the story with the same intensity, emphasizing the key lesson: survival is as much about attention and instinct as it is about luck. She believed that unseen guardians existed, moments of guidance that arrived when the world seemed at its most chaotic. And she carried that belief quietly and steadfastly into her final days. For those who listened, the story became more than history. It became a blueprint for life, to notice, to act, to respect the unseen, and to protect those you love with unwavering attentiveness. The figure on the stairs may have vanished from sight, but its legacy endured, not as a ghost or apparition, but as a living influence in the vigilance, intuition, and survival instincts that shaped generations. My grandmother's story was her gift, a reminder that guidance sometimes comes silently, and that paying attention can make the difference between life and death. And so, through memory, storytelling, and the habits instilled in her family, the guardian of that night continued to watch over us, an unseen presence, a quiet protector, and a testament to the fragile, miraculous thread of life preserved against impossible odds. Even as the years passed and the city healed, the memory of that night never faded. For my grandmother, it remained vivid, a shadow that followed her through quiet streets, familiar rooms, and even the everyday routines of life. It was not a tormenting memory, but a weight, a reminder that life hung on fragile threads, that decisions could ripple across time in profound ways. Every time she climbed stairs, she felt the faint echo of the figure's presence, the silent insistence that she move carefully, observe, and act. The weight of memory shaped her thoughts, her habits, and her understanding of the world. She taught my father to notice, to trust his instincts, to respect the subtle signs that often go unnoticed. The story of the figure on the stairs became more than a wartime anecdote. It became a framework for understanding vigilance, responsibility, and the fragile intersection of fate and action. Sometimes she would awake in the middle of the night, heart racing, imagining the shadows of the past stretching across the room. She would hold my father close and feel a quiet assurance that the same unseen force that had intervened once had not abandoned them, that its echo remained in the careful choices she made every day. Even decades later, she would recount the story to family, her voice calm but deliberate, the tension of that night still palpable. She emphasized not the terror but the guidance, the unseen hand that had protected her child, the intuition she had trusted, the split-second decision that had made all the difference. The weight of memory was heavy, yes, but it was also sustaining. It reminded her of the fragility of life, the importance of awareness, and the subtle, often invisible forces that could intervene in moments of crisis. Survival was never simply luck. It was observation, instinct, and courage. And in that weight, she found a quiet resilience. She carried it with dignity, teaching those around her that the lessons of survival, vigilance, and respect for unseen guidance were gifts to be honored, not forgotten. Even in the quietest moments, in the sunlit rooms of a post-war London now rebuilt, the memory remained. It was a whisper of caution, a heartbeat of gratitude, and a testament to the night when a figure on the stairs had turned the course of fate. The war had ended, but its lessons lingered in my grandmother's mind like shadows that never quite faded. She understood that survival was not a singular act of luck, but a series of choices guided by awareness, attention, and intuition. The night of the bombing had been her crucible, and from it emerged habits and instincts that shaped every aspect of her life. Parenting my father became an exercise in careful observation. She watched him constantly, not out of fear alone, but from a deep understanding that danger could appear in unexpected forms. Every street crossing, every crowded room, every creaking floorboard carried potential risk, and her vigilance became second nature. Yet there was a subtle difference in her approach. She was not overbearing. She did not live in panic. Instead, she taught through example, noticing the unusual, respecting instincts, responding to warning signs. The story of the figure on the stairs was a cornerstone, a living lesson that some dangers could be avoided only by listening to the quiet promptings of intuition. Even in the seemingly mundane routines of post-war life, she carried that awareness. She checked rooftops and doorways, observed unfamiliar faces, and navigated crowded streets with a practiced attentiveness. Small decisions, imperceptible to others, became shields that protected her and my father from accidents and hazards that others overlooked. Neighbors and friends often remarked on her uncanny ability to sense trouble before it arrived. She brushed off their curiosity with a quiet smile, insisting it was simply experience. But she knew better. It was the echo of that night, the guidance of the unseen figure, and the habit of vigilance it instilled that allowed her to navigate life with an almost supernatural awareness. The war had taught her that moments of clarity, of sudden instinctive knowledge, could be the difference between life and death. And she carried that knowledge carefully, a gift and a responsibility, passing it on not as fear, but as practical wisdom. Even decades later, she would recount the story to family gatherings, her voice steady and deliberate. It was never a tale meant to frighten, but to teach. Listen, observe, trust your instincts. Life often whispers its warnings before it shouts. In every small choice, in every glance toward a shadow, in every pause before crossing a street, the lessons of vigilance lived on. My grandmother's life became a testament to the power of awareness, and to the enduring influence of the night when a figure on the stairs had intervened to protect a fragile life. In the years following the war, my grandmother carried the memory of that night everywhere she went. It was not a tale of fear, but of vigilance, a constant awareness that unseen forces could shape the course of events. The figure on the stairs became in her mind a silent guardian, a protector who had intervened when human instinct alone might have faltered. Even in ordinary moments, its presence seemed to linger. When she walked through crowded streets with my father in his pram, she felt a subtle awareness of the surroundings, shadows that didn't belong, gaps in the crowd, sounds that were slightly off. She could not see the figure anymore, but she felt its influence guiding her attention, sharpening her senses. It was in the way she prepared for the unexpected, a sudden move to the side when debris fell near a sidewalk, a decision to leave a building before a loose roof beam gave way, a careful glance up the staircase before ascending. Each small act seemed guided by the echo of that warning from years before. The figure had left its mark on her, not as a haunting, but as a lens through which to view the world. Danger was always present, sometimes hidden, sometimes subtle, and her survivals and my father's had depended on attention to those signals. She taught this vigilance quietly, in habits rather than words, in caution rather than panic. Even as decades passed, she never dismissed the importance of intuition. Friends would tease her for pausing in hallways or for checking the sky before leaving the house, but she knew the cost of ignoring warning signs. That single night, that single intervention, had altered fate itself. It became her philosophy. Unseen protection exists in forms we may not understand, and life often offers signs, sometimes subtle, sometimes stark, and that demand recognition. Survival is not always about strength or speed. It is often about perception, trust, and the willingness to act on what cannot be fully explained. My father grew up under this quiet vigilance, shielded not only by my grandmother's care, but by the lessons the figure on the stairs had imparted through her actions. Even though he did not remember that night, its influence shaped the cautious, observant nature instilled in him. The unseen protector had departed physically, leaving no trace, yet its presence remained in the instincts, decisions, and attentiveness my grandmother carried through her entire life. It was a quiet, enduring force, invisible but undeniable, a reminder that survival often relies on guidance beyond the reach of reason. Even after the city began to rebuild, my grandmother never forgot the night of the bombing. The memory clung to her like smoke in a room, invisible, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Every time she climbed stairs, she felt the chill return, a whisper of that same warning that had saved my father. She spoke of it often, not with fear, but with reverence. The figure on the stairs had left a mark, a reminder that some forces in the world remain unseen but not powerless. The intuition it had invoked became part of her daily life. Subtle decisions, small precautions, an acute awareness that sometimes life depends on heeding instincts we cannot explain. Even ordinary sounds could trigger echoes of that night. The groan of a floorboard, a sudden crash outside, the whistling of the wind through broken panes, all could summon the memory. She learned to listen carefully, to respond calmly, to trust the instincts honed in a moment when hesitation could have been fatal. For years afterward, she recounted the story to family and friends, always emphasizing the message: listen, act, protect. Her warning was not one of superstition, but of acknowledgement that life, in times of chaos, sometimes presents guidance beyond logic. Even decades later, she would feel a similar presence in small moments of danger: a sudden pause before stepping into a street, an inexplicable avoidance of a crumbling staircase, a hunch that something was not right. Each time she would follow the instinct, quietly grateful for the guidance that had once preserved life itself. The war ended, buildings were reconstructed, and London returned to a semblance of normalcy. But for my grandmother, the lesson remained clear. Awareness, intuition, and respect for unseen forces could mean the difference between life and death. And every time she told the story, her voice carried the weight of that truth, echoing with the quiet insistence of a night when shadows spoke and survival depended on listening. Morning arrived slowly over the ruins of London. The fog of smoke and dust hung low over the streets, curling around the skeletal remains of bombed-out buildings. The war had left its mark on every corner, every street, every heart. My grandmother emerged from the sitting room, cradling my father carefully, her eyes scanning the fractured skyline. The house, though damaged, had survived. The roof where my father's cot had originally been placed was a splintered ruin. Timber jutted at odd angles, shattered glass littered the floor below, and the faint scent of smoke lingered in the air. Each detail reinforced the thin thread of luck, or perhaps fate, that had preserved life that night. Neighbors appeared in cautious clusters, peering over rubble, muttering to one another in hushed tones. The city was alive with the aftermath, fires smoldering, debris strewn across streets, and the occasional distant cry that pierced the heavy air. My grandmother moved carefully, her every step deliberate. Each footfall echoed against the fractured walls, a reminder that life had continued despite the chaos. She spoke softly to my father, rocking him gently, murmuring words that seemed both ordinary and profound. "You are safe. You are alive." Even as the sun began to pierce the smoke-filled sky, the city retained a sense of unreality. London had survived another night, but the invisible threads of danger had left their imprint. My grandmother knew deep down that it was not merely luck that had spared her child. Something unseen had intervened, guiding her decisions, steering her away from disaster. She recounted the night's events to her friend, though many details were left unspoken. The friend, still shaken, could hardly believe that instinct alone had prevented a tragedy. Yet my grandmother insisted the warning had been real. The figure on the stairs had been real, and its message had saved a life. That day, the city was both fragile and resilient. Fires were extinguished, rubble cleared, and survivors began the slow work of rebuilding. But for my grandmother, the experience had left an enduring mark. It was not only the knowledge of the war's devastation, but also the awareness of unseen forces, of intuition, of guidance beyond comprehension that had protected them. Even decades later, she would recall the moment when she chose to move her child to the sitting room. Every detail remained vivid: the chill on the staircase, the authority in the figure's presence, the weight of the decision. It was a memory intertwined with gratitude, awe, and the haunting certainty that fate sometimes comes disguised in whispers and shadows. As she looked down at my father, sleeping peacefully in her arms, she felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. Life had been preserved against impossible odds, and the unseen presence that had guided her would forever remain a testament to the fragility and resilience of existence during those harrowing days in London. That night, London seemed to hold its breath. The usual hum of the city, the distant shouts, the roar of early vehicles, the muted chaos of war, had dimmed to a trembling whisper. My grandmother sat in the sitting room, my father swaddled tightly in her arms. Every creak of the old house, every gust of wind through cracked windows made her heart lurch. The sky was a canvas of darkness, pierced only by the occasional flare of distant explosions. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the streets below, bending around debris, wrapping the city in a ghostly, distorted geometry. The wind carried the smell of smoke and fire, mingling with the faint scent of soot from the nearby ruins. Her eyes kept flicking toward the staircase. Though she knew she was in the safer room, the image of the figure lingered in her mind. The warning, the authority, the insistence. She could almost feel its presence watching from the shadows, ensuring her compliance. Hours passed slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Each distant rumble, each sudden flash of light from a far-off bomb, sent waves of tension through her body. Her arms were tight around my father, her senses sharpened to the slightest sound. Even the soft hiss of wind against the window pane seemed charged with possibility. Then it came, the explosion. It was sudden, deafening, and violent. The world trembled as the shockwave traveled through the city streets and into the fragile house. Roof timbers cracked and splintered, dust and debris showering from the ceiling where my father's cot had once been set. Time slowed. My grandmother's heart thundered, yet she remained rooted, her mind following the instinct that had guided her earlier. Hold the baby. Protect him. Trust the warning. Outside, the city groaned, a chorus of destruction and chaos. Fires bloomed across the skyline, distant screams punctuating the wail of sirens. Windows rattled violently, and the house seemed to bend and moan under the force of the blast. Inside the sitting room, she felt the vibration of the debris striking the upper floor. The cot, shifted to her precautionary placement, remained untouched. My father slept through it, oblivious to the destruction that had nearly claimed his life. In that moment, my grandmother understood something profound. The figure on the stairs had not been a hallucination or the product of stress. It had been a guide, an unseen presence that had intervened to alter fate itself. She held her child closer, tears slipping silently down her face, mingling fear, relief, and awe. The night stretched on, the city's chaos continuing beyond their walls. My grandmother did not sleep, not fully, but she remained vigilant, listening, waiting, reflecting. She had survived a night that could have ended in tragedy, and the presence that had warned her had left a permanent mark on her perception of the world. Even decades later, she recounted the night with the same intensity, the shadows, the chill, the figure's authority. That night of shadows had been transformative, shaping her understanding of protection, intuition, and the fragile line between life and death in a city at war. The morning after the bombing, the city was eerily silent. The usual distant rumble of destruction had been replaced by an almost reverent stillness, as if London itself was holding its breath. My grandmother sat in the sitting room, rocking my father gently, her eyes fixed on the window that framed a ruined skyline. The sight of twisted metal and shattered roofs did little to ease the memory of the stairs. Every creak in the house, every draft through the old timber, brought her back to that moment. The figure's presence, the warning, the urgency that had compelled her to act. Neighbors whispered about the blast. Some had barely escaped, some had not. The city was full of stories, yet hers felt different. Not just a tale of survival amid bombs, but a story that carried something unexplainable, something almost sacred. Even days later, she could feel the echo of the figure's warning. It lingered in her movements, the way she climbed stairs cautiously, the way she checked each doorway before entering, the way her hands hovered protectively over her child. It was a whisper of the past, a quiet insistence that danger was never fully absent. The friend she stayed with noticed her unease. "Hey, it's just nerves," she said. "We've all been through a lot. Sleep will help." But my grandmother knew it wasn't nerves. There was an intelligence, a guiding force that had saved her child. She felt it in her bones, a certainty that no rational explanation could touch. Even at night, when she tried to rest, she felt the presence again. Not fully seen, not fully understood, but tangible. A shadow in the corner of her mind, a pressure on her instincts, reminding her that the world was unpredictable, and that unseen hands sometimes intervened in the chaos. As she recounted the story later in life, decades after the war, she often emphasized the timing, how a single decision, a single instinctual pause had prevented a tragedy. It was the figure's warning, yes, but also her response, her courage and her attention to the subtle, inexplicable signs that had made the difference. The city healed slowly. Buildings were rebuilt, streets cleared, life resumed. Yet my grandmother's memory remained sharp, vivid and unshakable. That figure on the stairs was no longer just a wartime story. It became a part of her identity, a symbol of the thin line between disaster and survival, and the presence of unseen forces that guide us when reason alone cannot. Every time she told it, the tension returned, the fear and awe mingling in her voice. But alongside it was gratitude, a profound sense of wonder, and a deep understanding that even in the darkest times, life can be preserved by something beyond human comprehension. Even in a city ravaged by war, one could become accustomed to the noise. The distant thrum of bombs, the wail of air raid sirens, the sporadic crack of falling masonry. Yet some sounds, some moments refused familiarity. They demanded attention. The figure on the stairs was one such moment. My grandmother could still see it in her mind's eye even years later. The vague outline, the insistence in its stance, the way it seemed almost to vibrate with urgency. It had not moved like a human. It had not spoken like one. And yet, the warning it delivered was unmistakable. She tried to rationalize it in the days that followed. Perhaps it was fatigue, the stress of caring for a baby amidst relentless danger. Perhaps it was a trick of the shadows in the flickering candlelight. But no matter how she reasoned, the certainty of its message lingered. Do not sleep upstairs. That evening, after moving the cot to the sitting room, she found herself glancing back up the staircase repeatedly. Each glance was accompanied by the same prickling sensation along her spine, a sense that eyes unseen were still watching. The house itself seemed to acknowledge the presence. The floors creaked in unusual patterns, shadows stretched longer than they should have, and the air on the landing held a faint chill that was impossible to ignore. Outside, the city groaned under the relentless pounding of bombs. Fires painted the skyline in hues of red and orange, smoke curling like serpents over rooftops. The war was tangible in every sound, every smell, every heartbeat. Yet inside that fragile house, a different tension existed. Quiet, insistent, insidious. Even the baby, blissfully unaware of the supernatural drama unfolding around him, seemed to sense the danger. His sleep was restless, punctuated by small cries that made my grandmother's heart jump. Every time she adjusted the blanket or checked the cot, she felt the weight of unseen eyes, guiding her choices, confirming the path she had taken. And then came the night. The explosion. It was sudden, violent, and absolute. The very foundation of the house trembled. The walls shuddered, and the roof above the original upstairs room collapsed with a deafening crash. Dust and debris filled the air, the force echoing through every beam, every floorboard. My grandmother, clutching my father in her arms, could only hold her breath, praying as the world around her shook and moaned. The cot she had moved was untouched. The figure had not been seen again, but its warning had manifested in the most tangible form imaginable: survival. For decades afterward, My grandmother recounted the story with the same fervor. Every detail mattered: the chill on the stairs, the unspoken authority in the figure's presence, the split-second decisions that had saved her child. To her, it was proof that even amidst the chaos of war, unseen forces sometimes intervened to protect life in ways that reason could not explain. The city was barely recognizable. London, once bustling and alive, had become a fractured landscape of smoke, rubble, and uncertainty. The war left its scars not only on the streets, but on the hearts of those who remained. My grandmother, carrying my father as a baby in her arms, navigated the debris with care. Their home had been bombed out, reduced to charred timbers and shattered windows. The wind whistled through gaps in the walls, carrying the distant wail of air raid sirens and the faint, unsettling echo of destruction. Every shadow seemed alive, every sound a potential threat. A friend had offered shelter, a temporary sanctuary amid the chaos. It was a modest house on a quiet street, though quiet was relative in wartime London. My grandmother was grateful but wary. The house had its own personality: creaking floors, heavy curtains, and the ever-present smell of damp wood and coal smoke. She was shown to a room on the top floor, one of the few left undamaged by the surrounding destruction. It was sparsely furnished, with a narrow cot and a small wardrobe. The windows shuttered against the night air. My grandmother felt a strange unease as she climbed the stairs, my father bundled in her arms. Each step groaned underfoot, the walls seeming to lean inward as if listening. The baby cooed softly, unaware of the tension that wrapped around the house like fog. My grandmother reached the top landing, pausing as a sudden chill ran down her spine. And then she saw it, a figure on the stairs. Indistinct yet undeniable, it was not the shape of any living visitor. Its presence was silent, yet it carried authority, an insistence that chilled her to the bone. The figure's voice, low and firm, whispered words that cut through the ambient noise of the city. "Do not sleep in this room tonight." Her heart skipped a beat. The baby stirred in her arms, sensing the change in her tension. My grandmother did not hesitate. She turned almost instinctively and descended the staircase. Each step felt heavier than the last, every creak amplified in the otherwise silent house. At the bottom, she found her friend in the sitting room, tidying a small collection of belongings. "I think we should sleep here tonight," my grandmother said, trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled slightly. Her friend raised an eyebrow, annoyance flickering across her face. "Upstairs is prepared. Why move everything now?" "My instincts," my grandmother began, then paused. She didn't explain further. Words failed to capture the certainty she felt, the unshakable warning delivered by a presence she could not see fully. Reluctantly, her friend acquiesced. Beds were moved, my father's cot shifted into the sitting room, and they settled down for the night. My grandmother's nerves remained taut, though she forced herself to calm. Outside, the city groaned and rumbled with distant explosions, a lullaby of fear for those who dared sleep in London. Hours passed. The night deepened. Then, without warning, a bomb fell nearby. The earth shook, windows rattled, and the house shuddered violently. Upstairs, the roof could not withstand the impact. Timber and debris cascaded down, crushing the space where my father's cot had been prepared. In the sitting room, my grandmother held him tightly, heart hammering. The noise outside gradually receded, leaving only the jagged remnants of the night's terror. She looked at her sleeping baby and realized, with a shock that still reverberated through her memory decades later, that the warning had saved his life. The room, the figure, the instinct, all of it had intervened at the last possible moment. And so, my grandmother swore by the story until her dying day, insisting that the presence on the stairs had been real, that it had guided her through the chaos of war to protect her child. Time passed, but it didn't erase what had happened. It didn't fade neatly into memory the way other mornings had before. The alley, the fog, the voice, the gun, they lingered, a quiet undercurrent beneath the rhythm of daily life. But the fear had transformed. It was no longer sharp, all-consuming panic. It was awareness, vigilance, and respect for the fragile balance of ordinary life. I walked the streets differently now, not faster, not slower, but intentionally, each step measured, each glance purposeful. The city had layers I had never noticed before: light and shadow, open streets and blind corners. Each detail was data, each moment an opportunity to remain present. Sometimes in the early mornings, I passed that familiar corner. The alley stretched, dark and narrow, the streetlights casting pale halos in the mist. My body no longer froze. My heartbeat didn't spike. I simply walked past, alert but calm, recording the scene mentally, cataloguing what could be a danger and what could not. The banana peel, a small, absurd relic of that morning, had long since disappeared from the alley, gone with the city's indifference. Yet the memory remained, a marker of survival, a reminder that ordinary life could hide extraordinary threats. Detective Morales called occasionally, updates thin but steady. Patterns continued to emerge elsewhere in the city, a quiet reminder that danger existed beyond my immediate awareness. But it no longer controlled me. I had learned how to navigate the fog, how to respond, how to endure. At night, when the world went quiet and shadows stretched long, the memories sometimes returned. The sound of a footstep, the scrape of an object against pavement, the sudden whisper of air in the alley. All of it could trigger a pulse of adrenaline. But I recognized it. I catalogued it. I processed it. I was no longer helpless. Resilience had become a habit, awareness, a companion, life, a cautious but reclaimable path. I could walk, run, observe, and survive. Not perfectly, not without effort, but with intent. And in that quiet mastery of my own movement and thought, I discovered something profound. Survival was not only about escaping danger, it was about continuing, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. It was about carrying the memory without letting it dictate the rest of life. The city moved around me, indifferent and alive. Fog came and went. People walked to work, cars hummed past, and early commuters shuffled along their routines. I moved among them, changed but unbroken, carrying the echo of one morning and the clarity it brought, that life could be reclaimed even after the impossible. I had survived. I had run. I had catalogued, observed, and endured, and that morning and all that followed would continue to shape me, but it would no longer control me. The fog rolled in again one last time as I closed the window. It was just fog. It was just morning, and I was still here. Life began to return slowly in fragments. The mornings were still early, the streets still quiet, but the sharp edge of panic had dulled just enough for me to notice the small signs of normalcy. I started leaving the apartment without clutching my bag like armor. The city still hummed with potential danger, but I no longer felt trapped inside my own fear. Instead, every step became a careful assertion: I exist. I am still here. At practice, I found myself laughing again with the kids. Their energy, their chaos, became a reminder that life persisted, even after events that could have broken me. I still checked my surroundings, always aware, but I no longer flinched at every shadow. I returned to the corner. Not the alley, not yet, just the street leading up to it. My hands were steady, my heart racing, but with a different rhythm. This time it wasn't terror. It was a test, a confrontation with memory. Detective Morales visited occasionally, and each meeting became a quiet reassurance. He didn't offer false comfort, no platitudes about safety or closure, but he reminded me that surviving wasn't just luck. It was instinct, intelligence, and resilience. I began to understand something fundamental. Trauma wasn't a chain around my neck. It was a teacher. Every instinct honed, every observation, every split-second decision that had saved me became evidence of capability. I was capable. I had survived. I had outwitted danger. The city itself seemed different through this lens. Fog no longer swallowed the world. It revealed it. Shadows no longer threatened. They informed. Every street, every alley, every dim corner became a puzzle rather than a trap. I returned to writing in my journal each night, chronicling patterns, memories, and observations. Each word was both an anchor and a weapon. By organizing the chaos, I reclaimed my narrative. The nights of panic didn't vanish completely. Sometimes the pulse of memory surged, sharp and intrusive. But instead of letting it paralyze me, I catalogued it, dissected it, understood it. Fear became functional rather than oppressive. The resilience wasn't loud or obvious. It didn't come with fanfare. It was subtle, in the way I crossed streets, the way I walked home, the way I carried myself in the fog. It was in the quiet knowledge that I had faced something that could have ended me, and survived. And slowly I realized that life had more edges than before. Every choice mattered. Every step mattered. And the city, once indifferent and threatening, now seemed like a stage on which I had reclaimed my story. The fog rolled in that night, thick and pale, curling around the streetlights. I watched it from my window, a quiet observer, notebook in hand. Somewhere out there, danger still existed, unseen. But I had changed. I had survived. And in that, I found a quiet, hard-won strength. Fear had a new shape now. It wasn't raw, sharp panic anymore that had passed, but a constant hum, a presence in the back of my mind that never truly left. I became a guardian of myself, walking the city like someone learning the rules of an invisible enemy. Every morning, I left my apartment with eyes wide and ears tuned to every faint sound. Footsteps, distant voices, the scrape of a trash can lid, the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Anything could be a warning. Anything could be a sign. I carried my bag differently now. Not loosely, not carelessly. It was strapped across my chest, secure, ready. My phone was in hand almost constantly. The screen, a small rectangle of light and reassurance. I started taking mental notes. Patterns of the fog, the timing of early commuters, the way shadows shifted under the dim streetlights. Every street corner became a study in angles and escape routes. The city had become a map of potential danger, and I memorized it like a soldier memorizes terrain. Detective Morales checked in often, though we both knew the pattern remained elusive. "Vigilance is your weapon now," he said. "Not fear, not paranoia, awareness, observation. You survived because of your instincts. Don't let that fade." And I didn't. I walked different routes, varying the timing, forcing my mind to stay sharp. I observed every alley, every side street, every doorway. The fog, once an enemy, became a lens through which I understood the city. A living, breathing thing that could conceal danger as easily as it concealed beauty. Nightmares still came. The fog, the shout, the gun, all of it replaying in slow motion. But during the day I could channel it. The terror became a tool, sharpening my senses rather than consuming me. Neighbors noticed it too. The way I paused at intersections, the way I scanned the streets. Some thought it was paranoia. Maybe it was. But some instinct within me knew the city had layers most people never saw. They had rhythms, hidden beats that hinted at movement, presence, possibility. I started keeping lists. Small things, times, locations, minor anomalies. Old newspapers, discarded trash, shadows that moved oddly. Everything was data. Everything could matter. Even the alley and the one where it had happened became a reference point rather than a source of terror. I didn't step into it, not yet. But I no longer flinched when I saw it. I noted it, measured it, understood it. The vigil was exhausting. My body ached, my mind ran constant loops of contingency plans. But I had regained something crucial: control. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning. The city hummed around me indifferent. But I had changed. My senses were sharper, my awareness deeper. And in that subtle shift, I realized that survival wasn't just about escaping danger once. It was about understanding it, anticipating it, and being ready. The fog rolled in again that night, thick and damp. I watched it from my window, notebook in hand, heart still beating fast. The world outside hadn't changed. The danger was still there somewhere. But I was no longer just a potential victim. I was a participant, and that changed everything. It was subtle at first, what a glance here, a whisper there. Small things that didn't make sense alone, but together formed a rhythm I couldn't ignore. Neighbors mentioned strange sightings, a figure moving in the fog, discarded bags on the sidewalk, the faint echo of shouted commands that dissolved into silence before anyone could respond. At first I dismissed it as paranoia, the residue of adrenaline and fear, but the detective's call that morning changed everything. "We've noticed similar incidents nearby," Detective Morales said. His tone was calm, but there was a weight behind it. Not all violent, not all armed, but patterns. Same time of day, same kind of approach. Doesn't seem random. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The alley, the corner, the fog. That morning, everything came back in a rush. The smell of wet pavement, the banana peel in the alley, the press of metal at my temple. What does that mean? I asked, voice tight. It means, he said slowly, that what happened to you might be part of a series, something we haven't fully uncovered yet. I thought of the other mornings I had walked to the bus, how I had taken different routes, how I had noticed shadows that didn't belong, movements in fog that made me pause. Until now I had dismissed them. Now they had meaning. They were threads leading somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. I began retracing my steps, not recklessly, careful, measured, documenting everything. Each corner, each alley, each streetlight. Notes in my journal, sketches of routes, times, distances. My paranoia became strategy. Fear turned into vigilance, and the city itself seemed different. Every dark corner, every fog-laden street, every empty sidewalk carried a question. Was it coincidence, or was it something else watching, waiting? I met with Morales again that week. We walked some of the streets together, comparing notes. He listened as I described patterns I hadn't noticed until now. The timing of the early morning fog, the empty streets, the silence before the first car hummed past. He nodded as I spoke. These things rarely happen alone, he said. Most people never connect the dots. But when someone does, it's like noticing a pulse you didn't know existed. I realized then that the city had a rhythm I had only glimpsed once, a rhythm that carried danger quietly, invisibly, and that it was still pulsing. By evening, I returned home exhausted but alert. The corner was behind me, the alley silent. Yet I felt it in my bones. The past was not gone. It lingered in patterns, waiting to remind those who survived that the line between safety and chaos was thinner than they thought. That night, my journal lay open on the table. Each word was a tether, a way to anchor myself to reality while the world hummed quietly around me. And I wrote carefully, knowing that understanding the pattern might be the only way to keep it from closing in again. It began quietly, the way most changes do. One morning, weeks after the attack, I woke before my alarm. The air was still dark, but it wasn't heavy anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel the sharp jolt of fear when I sat up. My body was tired, yes, but not trembling. Something had shifted. Not enough to call it peace, but maybe the smallest step toward it. I decided I was tired of letting the corner win. I dressed slowly, layer by layer. The way I had that morning, the same jacket, the same hat. Not to relive it, but to take it back. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the knob, remembering how the metal had felt cold against my palm that night. The city outside was quiet. Damp pavement, a low gray sky, the kind of morning that doesn't promise much. I started walking. Each step was careful at first, like testing ice. My breath sounded too loud, my heartbeat louder still. When I reached the intersection where the alley began, my body froze on instinct, muscles remembering what the mind wanted to forget. The alley looked smaller now. Narrow, littered with trash cans and old boards, nothing more. Just a strip of shadow between two tired buildings. Still, I couldn't bring myself to step closer. Instead, I stood there, long enough for a bus to pass, for two joggers to glance at me curiously, for the fog to thin just enough for the morning light to touch the brick wall. Then I whispered it. I'm still here. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't victory. It was survival, plain and simple. That afternoon, Detective Morales called again. His voice was the same steady calm, but there was something different in his tone. A pause that wasn't there before. We've been checking other incidents nearby, he said. There's a pattern. Not exact, but close. A pattern. He didn't give details and just said they were looking into it. But that word stuck with me. It meant it hadn't been random. That maybe, somewhere, there was a name to the shadow that had followed me out of the fog. When the call ended, I realized my hands weren't shaking. I sat on the couch, staring at the same window that had felt like a prison just days before. Outside, the city moved as it always had. People walking, cars passing, the world pretending not to notice what it almost took from me. But this time, the silence wasn't just fear. It was something else, the start of resolve. That night, I took the detective's advice and started keeping a journal. Every detail, every sound, every thought. I wasn't writing for evidence anymore. I was writing so I wouldn't lose myself to the echo. And maybe, just maybe, to remind myself that the story wasn't finished yet. Fear doesn't leave all at once. It doesn't announce that it's finished with you. It stays in the smallest places, in the pause before a streetlight changes, in the squeak of a shoe behind you, in the weight of your own heartbeat when the world goes quiet. The week after the attack, I realized how much space fear could take up. It filled the hallway when I left my apartment. It rode the bus with me, sat next to me on the seat, and stared out the same window. Every reflection became a question. Is someone behind me? The first morning I tried to walk to the bus again. I didn't make it halfway down the block. The fog was thinner this time, harmless even, but the corner where the alley began felt different now. The air there seemed heavier, slower. My chest tightened before I could stop it. I turned around and went home. At practice, I tried to act normal. The kids didn't know anything, and I wanted to keep it that way. They laughed, they tripped over cones, they argued about music, normal sounds. But each shout, each burst of laughter made me flinch for reasons I couldn't explain. The assistant coach asked if I was all right. I said I was just tired. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. At night, the dreams came back. Always the same rhythm, the fog, the shout, the gun, the alley. I would wake with my hands curled into fists, the sound of my own voice echoing in my head. I started keeping lights on, one in the kitchen, one by the window. I told myself it was for comfort, but really it was so I could see the shadows move before they reached me. The detective's number sat on the counter, folded into a small square. I thought about calling just to ask if there was any update. But what could he tell me? That the city had swallowed another face, another story, another unsolved moment? Instead, I called my sister. I hadn't told her everything, just that there'd been an attempted robbery. Her voice cracked anyway. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "I wasn't," I said. It was the only answer I had. But after the call ended, the quiet returned. It always did. Sometimes when I couldn't sleep, I'd open the window and listen to the city. The sound of distant traffic, a stray siren, the low hum of power lines. I'd try to remind myself that these were the same noises I'd heard all my life. Nothing had changed except me. The world looked normal again, but it wasn't. Every morning I told myself I would take the old route again, just to prove I could. But when I reached the corner, my body froze. My mind replayed that voice and the order, the scream, and I turned back without even thinking. Fear had become part of my routine, and though I hated it, I also knew the echo was just another way of remembering that I was still alive. The next few days blurred together. Sleep came in pieces, 2 hours at a time, always ending with the same jolt, the sound of the gun cocking, the weight of someone behind me, the shout that yanked me back to the real world. When I finally answered the phone, the voice on the other end was calm and clipped. "This is Detective Morales. We're following up about the incident on Maple Street. He came by that afternoon. Plain clothes, quiet tone, eyes that had seen too many stories like mine." He set a small recorder on the coffee table, opened a notepad, and began again from the beginning. I told him everything. The fog, the mask, the exact sound of the man's boots scraping against concrete. The way he hesitated when he realized I wasn't who he thought I was. The way the air had tasted. Metallic, damp like rain and exhaust, Morales wrote without interrupting. Only once did he look up. "You ran toward the main road?" "Yes." "That probably saved you." The sentence landed hard. Probably. It meant the space between life and something else had been no wider than a thought. He asked about cameras, street corners, bus stops, nearby stores. I told him the bakery had one, though I doubted it worked. The place had been closed for months. He promised to check anyway. After he left, the silence pressed in again. I went back to the window. The alley was invisible from here, but I could still feel it. It was as if the whole neighborhood had tilted slightly. The dark spot on the map, where something violent had breathed and vanished. 2 days later, the detective called again. No prints, no footage, no witnesses. Just that banana peel, I laughed when he said it. Too loud, too sharp. He hesitated, then continued gently. Sometimes the smallest things help us mark the reality of what we survived. That night I wrote everything down. Every word he had said, every sound I remembered. It wasn't about evidence anymore, it was about control. If I could put the chaos into sentences, maybe I could contain it. The world outside carried on. The bus hissed past my stop every morning at 5:07 a.m., like nothing had changed. People still lined up at Starbucks with sleepy faces and earbuds. And I walked a different route now, longer, brighter, full of cameras, but even daylight felt thinner than before. When Detective Morales checked in a week later, his update was short. "No new leads yet. We're not closing it, but these cases, they fade fast." I thanked him anyway. After I hung up, I realized what he meant. The world forgets fast, but memory doesn't. The apartment was silent, but my body wasn't. Every nerve still pulsed with movement. My heartbeat hadn't slowed. My breath came in jagged pulls, and even the walls seemed to vibrate with leftover panic. I could still feel the cold imprint of the street beneath me. Still hear my own voice screaming as I ran. I locked the door once, then twice, then a third time, as if layers of metal could stop memory from getting in. The city outside was the same as always, a distant hum of traffic, the low whine of an early garbage truck, but it all sounded wrong. Too calm, too normal. My world had changed, but the rest of it hadn't even noticed. I sat down against the door, still in my jacket and hat, and stared at the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The smell of the banana, sweet, cloying, and still lingered on my fingers, and for some reason that smell felt unbearable. I wiped my hands against my pants until the skin went red. After a while, I realized I was counting. Breaths, maybe, or heartbeats. Anything to prove I was still here. When my phone finally buzzed, the sound nearly made me jump out of my skin. It was only 5:30 a.m. My thumb hesitated over the screen. The first number that came to mind wasn't 911. It was my assistant coach. Some part of my brain was still clinging to the idea that I needed to be at practice in an hour, that I had kids waiting on me, that I couldn't fall apart yet. But the tremor in my hands told the truth. I called the police. My voice shook so badly I could barely explain what had happened. The operator's tone was calm, professional, too calm. She asked questions that made sense but felt impossible to answer. What did he look like? Where exactly did this happen? Was anyone else there? Each question scraped against the raw edge of the moment I was trying to hold back. Within an hour, 2 officers stood at my door. One older, one young. Their uniforms looked too neat, too solid for the world I'd just run through. They took notes while I spoke. The words didn't feel like mine. They came out detached, like I was narrating someone else's story. I told them about the alley, the fog, the mask, the gun. About the banana peel I'd dropped without realizing. The older officer nodded, face unreadable. "You did the right thing by running," he said quietly. "You don't go down that alley." The younger one asked if I was sure he hadn't followed me. I said no, but I wasn't sure about anything anymore. When they left to check the scene, I sat in the living room and stared out the window. The first light of morning was breaking over the rooftops, soft and grey. The street looked harmless now, peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened there, but I knew better. Somewhere out there was still a man in a mask, walking through fog, blending into the city like smoke. The officers returned an hour later. They'd found nothing, just a damp alley, a few scattered footprints, and a browning banana peel on the ground. That tiny detail broke me in a way nothing else had. That stupid ordinary thing at my breakfast now sat there as the only proof that the nightmare was real. The officer handed me a small card with a case number and a name to call for follow-up. He told me to rest, to lock my doors, to contact someone I trusted. I nodded, though I knew rest wouldn't come. When they left, the silence came back, thicker this time. And in that silence, the questions began. What if I hadn't run? What if I'd hesitated just a second longer? What if he'd fired? Those questions wouldn't stop. They filled every quiet space, every pause between heartbeats. They stayed even as the sun came up and the city finally woke, and I realized that the world wasn't built to hold that kind of fear. It just absorbs it quietly, like the fog that swallows the light and waits for the next dawn. "Come with me," he said again. The words sliced through the mist, cold and sharp. The gun hovered steady. Behind him, the alley stretched like an open throat, dark, narrow, endless, a place where the light couldn't follow. The part of my brain that still functioned whispered one simple truth. If I walk into that alley, I won't come back out. My stomach turned, heavy with that realization. Every breath came shallow, shaky. I could hear the world, the hum of a streetlight, the soft buzz of the fog, but everything felt far away, as if I was listening through glass. "Move," he barked. My mind fractured into voices again. Voice 1, do what he says. Stay alive. Voice 2, if you go, it's over. and for a moment I hesitated, long enough for fear to feel like a solid weight pressing against my chest. My body wanted to freeze, to lock in place, to surrender to the